Good day. I'm John Fernandes. Welcome to eNewsline Live from AACSB's world headquarters in Tampa, Florida. eNewsline Live is a streaming video that addresses issues facing the management education industry through interviews with a recognized expert and a live global audience. The first 25 minutes will be discussion of predetermined questions, and the final 15 minutes will be discussion of questions posed by the audience. Segments will air bi-monthly, and a recording of each Newsline Live segment will be available on AACSB's website the day after the live broadcast. Our guest today is Yingyi Qian, Dean and Professor of the School of Economics and Management at Tsinghua University in China. Dean Qian is an active volunteer for AACSB, currently serving on its board of directors, and has served the management education industry both in Asia and globally in numerous capacities. We're grateful to have such an experienced and influential person with us today to discuss a topic of great interest to AACSB's members. Our discussion today with Dean Qian will be in management education in China and beyond, and it's the first in a series of eNewsline Live segments that will focus on current issues and trends in specific world regions. We are particularly thrilled to have Dean Qian join us today for our segment on China. Interestingly, Tsinghua University was one of 9 universities in China to pilot the MBA program in 1991. Thus, this academic year makes the 20th anniversary, not only for Tsinghua University MBA program, but also more broadly for MBA education in China. Dean Qian, welcome to eNewsline Live.
Delighted to be here.
All right, for our first question, over the past several years, the School of Management at Tsinghua has been piloting the undergraduate curriculum reforms for Tsinghua University. Other recent reforms to business education have put in more emphasis on cultivating students' practical capabilities through experiential learning courses. Could you tell us more about these reforms in undergraduate business education, what drove them, and how they are working? And then if you could follow on with a discussion of the MBA reforms you've made.
Let me start with some background. Traditionally, the Chinese undergraduate education emphasizes on mathematical, analytical, or hard skills. There are many courses in mathematics, statistics, computer programming, etc. Students are trained to be good in solving mathematical equations. However, usually weak on the side of communications, writing skills, and humanities in general. The last few years, we did some experiment, try to change this, to put more emphasis on the humanities side of the education. For example, we created several new courses, required courses for freshmen and sophomores in their first 2 years in college. There are several courses such as Chinese writing, communications, Chinese civilization, Western civilization, and another course, very important, what we call critical thinking and moral reasoning. Finally, a course on psychology. All these courses never offered before to economics and business majors, students in China. But with all these new courses, not only the substances are different from mathematics and statistics, but also the teaching styles are very different. Instead of getting a standard answer, students have to debate with each other or with the instructors, try to make arguments in front of other students. So through this, that students gain the experiences of making arguments, put it in writing, and to think more broadly from different perspectives of the same question. This is what we call soft skills that we think are very important for business majors, and actually more important for every major, we think. I think this is something that is happening in many universities in China. At my school at Tsinghua, we did a little bit faster, And students actually welcome all these changes.
Good. Well, I believe that what you're doing is certainly producing a global product, which is very important. At the same time, the local economy is being built. To what degree do the reforms you've just described reflect broader trends in management education in China?
I think more and more people realize that management education is not simply a set of problem solving or skills or the skills that rely on mathematical reasoning. And more rely on human skills and the understanding of the environment, not only in the context of China, but also in the context of global economy and the world. So therefore, all this requires students not only to be good in analytic skills, but also to be good in understanding of the broader environment. And also, very important, to be good in communications, to communicate ideas to different people from different cultures. So therefore, with this, now, I think there is a consensus here, but the difficult part is how to implement this new set of ideas. For example, it's relatively easy to find instructors to teach mathematics or accounting or statistics or computer programming. That's a lot harder to find faculty members to teach communications, to teach composition, to teach ethics, to teach moral reasoning. It also requires very different set of teaching skills. In addition, more likely for those courses, classes have to be smaller than big lectures, so will be more costly. So at the implementation, on the implementation part, it's a lot harder than previous cases.
Interesting and different challenges for an exciting emerging economy. Management education has expanded dramatically in China in the past decade, at a pace that the Financial Times recently referred to as warp speed. In contrast to the pilot schools in 1991, today more than 230 Chinese schools offer MBA education. What have been some of the major changes in China in the past 20 years that have caused this significant growth in Chinese management education?
The MBA education started in China in 1991. In that year, a total of 94 students nationwide were enrolled in the MBA programs in 9 universities. And Tsinghua University was one of the 9 pilot universities. Today, the annual enrollment in MBA programs throughout the country is over 30,000, with more than 200 schools offering MBA programs. I think there is a simple reason to explain this. I think the fundamental reason is the very fast expansion of the Chinese economy. In the last 2 decades, the Chinese economy grew at an average annual growth rate of over 9%, which means today's China's economy is about 5 times as the one 20 years ago. With this expansion of the economy follows naturally the demand, huge demand, increased demand for managers. And therefore, we see this huge expansion. It's not a surprise. So I would say that the fundamental reason is the underlying economy.
Well, we've seen to some extent the same thing on a slightly smaller scale in Brazil, with the growth of the economies being, in some cases, double digits. It's a little different when you're in an environment where the growth in GDP is less than 3% annually. Right. It's fairly mature. It's easy to manage that volume change. How do you think Chinese business schools were able to make such great strides in such a short period of time?
I think there are many reasons for that. One is I would consider that the Chinese are very pragmatic, just like they develop their economy, the same way they develop management education. Education in general, but management education in particular. When they see the opportunities, the market opportunities there, they try to accommodate their education model. Let's take MBA education as an example. In addition to the regular MBA programs, including part-time or evening programs, a big expansion, maybe the largest expansion, is what is known as executive MBA or EM, which is, I think this is the largest part of the graduate management education, combining the MBA education with the executive education. So this is the executive education with a degree. We see small classes in the US or in Europe for executive MBA, but give you an example, at Tsinghua University, we enroll every year the same number of executive MBA students as the regular MBA students. Plus, these executive MBA students are in their 40s, more senior than the executive MBA students we see in the US and Europe. This is because the Chinese universities started MBA education as late as 20 years ago. So that's why many of these managers or executives didn't have the chance to take the MBA education. So the Chinese saw this opportunity and adopt to this environment. So therefore, I think this is one of the reasons that's why they are able to take the opportunity and doing something that's similar, but not exactly the same as in the US or in Europe.
Well, it's nice to have some of the MBA's highest paying customers in those particular groups. Schools in many parts of the world are facing increasing financial pressures due to budget cuts, protests against student tuition hikes, and pressure to expand programs and hire faculty. Yet in China, the government research support for higher education has reportedly increased, particularly research, 20% every year for the last decade. The government's 985 project is channeling billions of dollars to 39 top universities, Tsinghua, to help them compete internationally. What do business schools see in China as the priorities for this increased investment?
Well, Tsinghua is one of the 30 985, so-called 985 universities. So the government did provide research funding for these universities, but not to the business schools. So mostly all these research monies went to science and engineering part of the university. For all the business schools and school of management in China, I think I can say that for all of those business schools in Chinese universities, we mainly rely on tuitions. Not tuition for undergraduates or masters or PhDs. Those are essentially almost free. But tuitions from MBAs, from executive MBAs, and from non-degree executive education. For example, it's not atypical for a business school in Chinese public universities. By the way, almost all the universities in China are public, that the government funding only account for maybe less than a quarter, or even less than 10% of the total budget of the business school. The majority of the funding comes from the tuitions of these, what we call professional degrees, MBAs, executive MBAs, and non-degree executive education.
Yingyi, I think that's a piece of information that most individuals watching this program didn't expect. It sounds similar to a situation I've heard quite frequently relating to California. So I think that the fact that the business schools are market-driven is a surprise, and I think an excellent development. But also, as governments put more and more money into research, into the math and the sciences, I think for business schools, the advantage is in the long run, these individuals will require management skills, and that's good news for MBA programs, particular executive MBA programs. They should be coming back as a benefit of this investment. Not all Chinese business schools are benefiting from additional funding through the 985 project, which you've said to some extent there, though they still serve a national need by contributing to higher education capacity. Could you elaborate on how these schools are faring financially and what is different about the strategies they employ, maybe somewhat beyond the tuition question?
Well, for research universities, the Tsinghua is one of them, that faculty apply for research grants. Those grants come from two different sources. One is from the government. China has what they call China National Science Foundation and China's National Social Science Foundation. So this is the one route to get the funding. Increasingly, there are also funding from corporations, from local governments, and from other institutions of multinational corporations, for example. So those are the sources for research funding. So that is similar to the U.S. and Europe, except that maybe proportionally more money coming from the corporate side than here. But again, in terms of magnitude, tuitions play a much larger role in China. In part because demand from the business sector is huge, particularly for the better known universities in China, because the Chinese are very much obsessed with brands. So they like to pay for that, for the premium education. So therefore, I want to add that the government policy is also helpful because there's no regulation for non-degree, for the pricing on the non-degree programs. And also government is flexible on the degree programs as long as they are viewed as professional degrees. As long as they are not undergraduate degrees, they are not PhDs or regular masters. So therefore that's helpful for the business school.
Well, it's nice to see a government that at least thinks somewhat like a business, where in the long run, cash inflows must meet or exceed cash outflows. Most of the rest of the world doesn't seem to realize that that's an objective of the business environment. According to a report from the Institute of International Education, China ranked first among countries surveyed as the desired location for collaborative degree program partners. That funding methodology probably doesn't hurt. At the same time, Chinese schools must also be strategic about the number and types of partnerships that they enter. What advice would you offer to schools outside of Asia that are interested in establishing partnerships with Chinese business schools?
I can say from our own experiences. In the last a decade and a half, we partnered with several leading business schools. Give you two examples. One is that with MIT Sloan. MIT Sloan helped us in our international MBA program. Although this is our degree, it does not involve MIT degree, but MIT does give a certificate. The other program does involve 2 degrees from 2 universities or schools is our joint executive MBA program with INSEAD. And we started that 5 years ago, was very, very successful. The students 80% of the students in that program are non-Chinese. And the students spend half time in Beijing and the other half time in Singapore, as INSEAD has a campus there. We're pretty happy with the cooperation. We learn a lot from INSEAD, and I think the vice versa. I think the advice I would give to people who are interested in having a partner in China is, first, there's huge demand from the Chinese business schools, simply because there's a huge demand for business education, a high quality business education, and a global one from China. The global business education in China. So the best way to do that is to form a partnership. Another benefit of forming a partnership is that the Chinese government regulation is quite friendly and more flexible if you have a foreign partners. So that's another reason that the Chinese are eager to find foreign partners, either with degrees or without degrees involved. But I think that there are 2 things very important. One is a fit, whether you feel that this particular business school or university is the right fit for you. In our case, for example, we do feel that INSEAD is the right fit for us. Second is, I think it all depends on execution and implementation. Many schools, they may say nice things. They also show great interest, but when it comes down to implementation, it comes short of your satisfaction. So therefore, make sure that your partner from China or partners are good in execution. A way to find out is to have some trial. For example, to jointly organize some symposiums or conferences, and you will see the organization capability of your potential partner. So I did hear stories of some stories of failure of cooperation. Most of them happened at the execution level and stage. So make sure your partner has the capability to do the right things, to implement the schemes as you plan.
Well, let's broaden our focus now to speak more generally about the Asia region. Obviously, for all the commonalities across the Asian countries, there are many, many more significant differences in their educational systems, economic realities, cultures. But for the sake of our viewers who are trying to better understand the region, I'd like to ask you to take a step back and think about the region and the role in global management education landscape. You've studied and been on the faculty at schools in the US and interacted substantially with schools in other parts of the world through your volunteer roles with AACSB and beyond. Would you draw on this experience with management education and world regions to share some of the distinctive traits of management education in the East, namely Asia? And what would be a faculty member coming to Asia from the West? What would they find surprising?
Let me first go to the fundamentals. That is the economic growth in Asia. It's pretty much now the story in the world in the last few years that Asia really accounts for the most growth. China and India, to give you two big examples. Each of those countries has a population of over 1 billion. And the growth rate, in the case of China, 9%, in the case of India, also more than or around 8%. So that's a huge. So I think the first thing that a person goes to Asia will find the economy is very dynamic. A lot of new buildings new roads, a lot of activities. So therefore, the Asia-Pacific region is, if not the center, but a center, a most important center for growth, for economic growth. This is directly related to management education. So that's the first thing I would think that we should, take notice. The second, down to the level of corporation and for the issue of management, I can say from my experiences with China is that people or managers pay more attention, spend more time on relationships, on how to deal with people than other parts of the world. This is not surprising at all. But I can tell from my experiences with my MBA students or executive MBA students. They come to schools not only for learn knowledge, this is part of that, but perhaps not the main part of that. The main part of joining the program is to get to know each other, to form the relationship or connections or networking. Like, I know this is universal, but it's just much more in Asia than other parts of the world. So that goes back to the issue that I said earlier, is that ironically, our business schools education didn't capture that part. We taught a lot of hard skills without much about human skills, but in reality, it's just completely opposite. That is that you have to learn from practice, that you have to deal with the issues related to human skills and related to the connections and relationships, or in Chinese we call 关系. That's very, very important. 关系 is important everywhere, just more important in China and Asia.
Well, Yingyi, I could ask you questions all day, and I'm afraid I'm running out of my time to ask you questions. But let me ask one final question that's been on my mind. Let's conclude by going full circle in returning to our initial focus on Tsinghua University's School of Economics and Management. You've discussed several recent strategic initiatives related to curricula, what's next on the agenda for your school in terms of strategic priorities. What do you think is very important?
For a school like ours, we cannot compete with other business schools in China on quantity. We don't want to compete on quantity, and we want to compete on quality. So the quality of faculty, the quality of students, we have pretty good students already, but we need to increase the quality of the faculty, of research, and of teaching. So I think I put more emphasis and priorities on the quality side. One specific issue that I've been thinking for a long time, and also in the last few years that put a lot of emphasis on, is even though our school is very globalized or internationalized, we want to be more local. We want to be more Chinese. Now that sounds ironic, but let me explain. It sounds paradoxical. Is that I often heard from our international students, as well as Chinese, but more strikingly from international students, that when they come to Tsinghua to do an MBA program, they complain. One of the complaints is that they learn too little about the Chinese environment or about the Chinese context, for good reason, because most cases we used are Harvard Business School cases. Most of these cases about US or American companies, not about Chinese companies. Now, there is a shortage of good cases on the Chinese economy, on the Chinese companies. So in the last few years, the school devoted resources and energy to develop high-quality cases with the Chinese content. So last year, 2011, we already developed over a dozen cases on the Chinese corporations and distributed them in English through the Harvard Business School distribution channel and another European case distribution channel. These are available worldwide. But that's not enough because the whole world is interested in Asia, in China, and there's not enough knowledge. So therefore, in that sense, I say that we have to be more Chinese. Of course, these are Chinese companies that working in the world global environment. It's not a just Chinese case. It's not just cases about Chinese company. It's a broader environment that we need to understand. So therefore, we want to be both global and local. It's a new word coined, I don't know by whom. It's called glocal, G-L-O-C-A-L, local. So you have to be both global and local. I think this is particularly important for Asia. As I said, Asia will remain to be the major growth story for the decades to come. So therefore, the world is interested in Asia, in China, and the business education has to adapt to that.
The whole world wants to be more Chinese. Something that we do is we track business schools numbers around the world, and nearly half of the business schools in the world now reside in Asia, and I think that's a surprise to many people. Well, finally, let's turn to questions from our live audience. The first question is from a professor at a school in France. I wonder if it was INSEAD, since they had such good play during this meeting. Our friend Deepak Jain is very pleased. What do you see as some possible ways for better Eastern-Western cooperation in management education?
Well, our experiences, pleasant experiences of cooperation between us and INSEAD serves as a good example. Over the last 5 years, actually next week, we are going to graduate the 4th cohort of this joint program. We call the Tsinghua University EMBA program. In short, we call it TIMBA, T-I-E-M-B-A. So the students came from many different countries, from Europe, from the US, from Asia, from Southeast Asia. And they fully utilize the benefits from the two campuses and the two universities and two schools. And as I mentioned, they spend half time in Beijing, the other half time in Singapore. Maybe that one module in Shanghai, another module in Fontainebleau, or even in Abu Dhabi. So they can truly leverage the advantages of the two schools. Well, I think INSEAD is special. You just mentioned that France. I guess that INSEAD would call itself not a school in France, but the business school for the world. So that's a slightly different focus.
Well, our next question is from lovely Leipzig, Germany. Can you tell us about any successful models in China in which universities and companies are working together to develop management talent? What are the key factors that have made them successful?
Well, I think it's in the process of developing. It's still too early to tell a mature case, but what I can say is that from my own experiences, we form very close relationship with corporations. Particularly the big corporations in China, almost all of them have their own training schools for training their managers. But our faculty and our research have certain advantages, but theirs also have their own advantages. So therefore, the close relationship between the companies and the business schools work in many cases, try to develop joint courses together. But as I said, this is still at its infancy. It's still at the very beginning. Try to find the right model. Now, there is a government regulation in China that corporations, the school training schools or schools in corporations cannot offer degrees. So therefore, only the universities can offer degrees. Although the training schools in corporations, they can offer non-degree executive education.
Well, from someone that is staying up late tonight, and our final question is from Singapore, the home of AACSB's Asia office. As management education evolves and grows in Asia, what kinds of experiences and character traits are needed in the next generation of Asian business school leaders? And I would add in Asian business leaders too. If you could address both, I think that would be
well. I think the characters or traits for business school leaders are precisely those we teach MBAs. We teach business leaders. There are several traits I think very important. I think first of all, I would put entrepreneurship to be the first. Business education in Asia learn from the West in the current form. But they need to work with the complex of the institutional complexities of the East. So you have to be entrepreneurial in order to be successful in Asia. You have to adapt to the particular institutional environment with a lot of government regulations, a lot of constraints from the existing educational system. If you want to do the executive MBA, if you want to do, say, specialized masters in accounting or in finance, all these are not exist before. To create new programs, you need to be entrepreneurial. So I would think entrepreneurship is most important. Take China example, almost all of the universities are public universities. So we have to deal with the government bureaucracy. The experiences shows that many things are possible. It's not the case that because of the regulation, you can do nothing. You can do a lot of things. However, you have to be entrepreneurial. So that's the number one thing. Number two, I think for the business education in particular, there's more so than, say, engineering education, is that you really need to have a global perspective, or to have a world view about the business education. For the simple reason is the economies in the world are very much interconnected. It is the business areas that first become very international, either international through international trade or capital flows or the flow of ideas. So therefore, it's not enough just to have a very localized business education. You have to be global. So I would think entrepreneurship and global perspectives are the most important for the next generation of business school leaders in Asia.
My belief is that entrepreneurship without innovation in the long run creates redundancy and actually exits from the market. So would you talk a little bit about China's efforts to advance innovation to support its entrepreneurial activities and its business health in general?
Well, innovation, there are different levels of innovation that sometimes that you learn from the advanced countries, try to adopt particular model to the particular environment, institutional environment. In China, that's part of the innovation. Of course, when we say innovation, we probably mean that it's more creative innovation that not seen elsewhere. I just mentioned the case of executive MBA education. I think in China, it's on a much larger, not only on a much larger scale, but the way it works also different from executive education, say at Wharton, or at MIT, or at Columbia or Berkeley, with much bigger size, more senior students, a big size of the class. You really need to have a lot of activities. For example, when we run these executive MBA programs, we basically run them like very, very elite clubs. So therefore, not only that the students learn during the 2 years at school, but we have to follow up with many, many programs after they graduate. So it's a constant learning process to make sure these students, they connect to each other. So all these things, I would think these are the innovations.
Well, Yingyi, I want to thank you for your insightful and deep and I think exciting description of management education in Asia and particularly in China. You've been a wonderful guest, and I hope you drop by from Beijing sometime. I also want to mention that in May of this year, I don't have the dates at the top of my head, we will be holding the annual Asia conference at Tsinghua University in China. So we'll be happy to see you there again.
May 23rd to 25th.
Thank you so much. May 23rd to 25th. Mark your calendars. And I want to thank you, our viewing audience from across the globe, especially those of you in Singapore that stayed up very late and throughout Asia, for your participation in this illuminating discussion on management education in China. The next broadcast of eNewsline Live will occur in March during the first 2 weeks. It'll be a surprise, even I don't know what the topic is. Please keep an eye on our website for further information on this and subsequent episodes of eNewsline Live. And don't forget to watch some of the previous segments that are retained on the AACSB website. Thank you, and good day.